Talk, girl, or you'll regret it.
I don't know anything.
A tale of forbidden's desire on the high seas, where a simple village girl discovers that surviving one night with the Caribbean's most feared pirate captain will change both their fates forever. The Black Serpent's arrival silenced Port Royal's bustling harbor like a death knell. Merchants abandoned their wares, women pulled children indoors, and even the Royal Navy's patrol boat retreated to safer waters. The ship's black sails against the crimson sunset painted a picture that had haunted Caribbean nightmares for over a decade. Captain Nathaniel Blackwood stood at the helm, tricorn hat shadowing eyes that had witnessed 20 years of brutal survival. His weather-beaten face bore scars that told stories his lips never would, a jagged line across his jaw from a Spanish cutlass, another through his left eyebrow from a mutiny he'd ended permanently. The gold chains around his neck and the ornate pistols at his belt spoke of conquests that had made him the most feared man sailing these waters. "Captain, we've secured the provisions," his quartermaster reported, keeping his distance. Even the crew who'd sailed with Blackwood for years knew better than to test his patience after 3 weeks at sea hunting a Spanish treasure galleon that had somehow escaped their grasp. Blackwood's gaze swept the docks where people scattered like rats before a cat. This was power, not the kind granted by kings or bought with gold, but earned through 15 years of making certain his enemies never lived to challenge him twice. The pirate code governed his world with ironclad rule, and he'd built his empire by respecting it absolutely while remaining the most dangerous man to ever swear its oath. "Bosun, inventory the hold," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority that made admirals nervous. "I want to know every barrel, every crate, every—" "Captain." The call came from below deck, urgent enough to interrupt him. His first mate emerged from the cargo hold, dragging someone, with him. She stumbled onto the deck in a simple cotton dress, blonde hair disheveled and ocean green eyes wide with terror that she was desperately trying to hide behind a mask of defiance. Dirt smudged her cheek and her hands were rope-burned from climbing aboard during their last port stop. She was perhaps 25, with the sun-kissed skin of someone who'd spent her life in Caribbean ports and absolutely, impossibly out of place on his ship. The entire crew froze. In 15 years, no one had dared stow away on the Black Serpent. Blackwood descended from the helm with deliberate slowness, each boot strike against the deck a countdown. His crew parted like the Red Sea, giving him clear passage to the trembling girl who was trying so hard to appear brave. He'd seen that look before, on men facing their final moments, on captains watching their ships sink. Fear wrapped in desperate courage. "Do you know," he said softly, and that soft tone made his crew shift nervously, "what happens to stowaways on my vessel?" She lifted her chin, and for just a moment, something flickered in those green eyes that wasn't terror. "I've heard the stories, Captain Blackwood. Everyone in the Caribbean has." The fact that she knew his name should have pleased him. Instead, it made something uncomfortable as twist in his chest. She'd heard the stories, knew what he was, and had still chosen his ship. That took either stupidity or desperation, and looking at the determination beneath her fear, he suspected the latter. "Then you know I don't make idle threats." He circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. "The sea keeps my promises for me. Men who cross me tend to take very permanent swims. I'm not a man," she whispered, and damn if there wasn't steel in that whisper. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that both felt and neither wanted. His crew watched with barely concealed fascination as their captain, the man who'd never hesitated in 15 years, paused. "No," Blackwood finally said, his voice carrying across the silent deck. "You're something far more dangerous." He leaned closer, close enough to see the pulse hammering in her throat. "What's your name?" "Elena." Just one word, but she spoke it like a challenge. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the deck in shadow. Somewhere in the rigging, a rope creaked. His quartermaster cleared his throat nervously. They were all waiting for his judgment. Blackwood made his decision with the same instinct that had kept him alive through countless battles. My quarters. Now. The crew erupted in murmurs until one look from him restored absolute silence. Elena's defiance faltered for just a second before returning with force. And then what? He smiled, and it wasn't kind. Survive one night, and I'll grant you freedom. Failed to survive it. He let the implication hang in the salt-heavy air like a noose. Well, the Caribbean is full of people who couldn't meet my expectations. As she walked toward his cabin, escorted by 2 crew members with hands on their weapons, Blackwood watched her straight back and defiant posture. His first mate approached cautiously. "Captain, the crew will talk. Let them." Blackwood's eyes never left Elena's disappearing form. She wanted passage on the Black Serpent. Now she'll learn exactly what that means. But as the stars emerged above the ship that had witnessed so much death and darkness, Captain Nathaniel Blackwood felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years at sea: uncertainty about what the morning would bring. The captain's quarters reflected 15 years of plundering the richest ships in Caribbean waters. Gold coins spilled from an open chest, maps marked with blood and treasure decorated the walls, and weapons enough to arm a small militia lined the cabin. But Elena's attention fixed on the man who'd just locked the door behind them, sealing her fate with the turn of a key. Blackwood removed his tricorn hat, revealing dark hair tied back with a leather cord. Tattoos covered his forearms, anchors, compasses, names of ships he'd sent to the bottom. The candlelight caught the scars crossing his chest through his open shirt, each one a testament to survival against impossible odds. "You wanted to stow away on my ship," he said, pouring rum into 2 pewter cups with hands that had commanded death for longer than she'd been alive. "Why?" Elena's fear transformed into something sharper anger at circumstances that had driven her to this desperate choice. "Because Port Royal had nothing left for me. My father owed debts to men who collect payments in ways that don't involve coin." He studied her with eyes that had learned to read truth from lies in the split second before betrayal. "So you chose the most feared pirate in the Caribbean as your escape plan?" "I chose the one ship that could take me far enough away that they'd never find me." She met his gaze without flinching, even as her hands trembled. "And I heard other stories, too. That you follow the pirate code, that you protect your crew, that despite everything you are, you have honor." The word hung between them like an accusation. Blackwood laughed, a dark sound without humor. "Honor? I'm a pirate, love. I've built my reputation on ships that never made port and men who feed the sharks. You're betting your life on stories told in taverns by drunk sailors. And yet you haven't hurt me." Elena took a step forward, emboldened by the fact that she was still breathing. "You could have thrown me overboard the moment your first mate dragged me on deck. The crew expected it. But you didn't. Don't mistake calculated interest for mercy." He moved closer, deliberately invading her space, testing her courage. "I haven't decided if you're worth the trouble of keeping alive, or if the ocean should claim you before sunrise." But she didn't retreat. Instead, Elena did something that surprised them both. She reached out and touched one of the scars on his forearm, tracing the puckered skin left by what looked like a musket ball. "How old were you when this happened?" The question disarmed him more effectively than any weapon. 19. Spanish patrol boat off Tortuga. His voice had lost its threatening edge, replaced by something raw. "The day I learned that showing mercy gets you killed. Is that what made you into this?" She gestured at the cabin, the weapons, the evidence of a life built on violence and fear. Blackwood caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough to remind her who held power here. "This is what kept me alive when everyone else from my village died screaming. When the Royal Navy hung my father for smuggling and left his body on the docks as a warning. When I realized that in this world, you're either the predator or the prey." For the first time since entering his quarters, Elena saw past the legendary Captain Blackwood to the man beneath, someone who'd been forced to choose survival over soul. who'd built walls thicker than any ship's hull because vulnerability meant death. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and meant it. He released her wrist as if burned. "Don't apologize to me. I made my choices and built my empire on them. 20 years at sea, 100 men loyal enough to die at my word, enough gold to buy any port in the Caribbean. I don't need your pity. It's not pity." Elena's voice strengthened. "It's recognition. You think I don't understand being forced into impossible choices? You think growing up in Port Royal's slums, watching my mother work herself to death while men took everything we had, didn't teach me that sometimes there are no good options?" Something shifted in Blackwood's expression. A crack in the armor. "Then you know why I can't just let you go." Word spreads fast in these waters. If Captain Blackwood shows mercy to a stowaway, every desperate fool will try their luck on my ship. "So what happens now?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew. He moved to the window overlooking the dark Caribbean waters. The moonlight caught his profile handsome in a brutal way, like a storm that's beautiful until it destroys you. "We have until sunrise. You survive this night in my quarters without breaking, and I'll put you ashore in Jamaica with enough coin to start fresh. You prove yourself more trouble than you're worth." He didn't finish the sentence. "And if I don't want to leave come morning?" Blackwood turned, genuine surprise crossing his features. "You're standing in the cabin of the most dangerous man sailing these waters, negotiating your survival, and you're thinking about staying?" Elena moved to stand beside him at the window, looking out at the ship that represented everything she should fear, and somehow didn't. "Maybe I'm tired of running. Maybe I'm tired of being helpless while life happens to me. Maybe." She took a breath. "Maybe I see something in you that everyone else is too afraid to look for. You see a monster with a conscience?" His tone was mocking, but his eyes were intent. "That's what makes me dangerous, Elena. I know exactly what I am, and I've made peace with it." "Have you?" she challenged. "Because someone who's made peace with being a monster doesn't hesitate before passing judgment. Doesn't offer bargains when killing would be simpler. Doesn't look at a stowaway like she's a person instead of a problem." The tension between them shifted from dangerous to something far more complicated. Blackwood reached out, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear with surprising gentleness. "You're playing a dangerous game. I stopped playing games when I climbed aboard your ship." Elena's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I'm betting my life that there's more to Captain Blackwood than his legend. Am I wrong?" For a long moment the only sound was waves against the hull and the distant calls of his crew on deck. Then Blackwood did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He answered honestly, "I don't know anymore." Dawn approached the black serpent with fingers of gold and crimson, painting the Caribbean waters in shades that reminded Blackwood of both treasure and blood. He stood at the window of his quarters, watching the sunrise while behind him, Elena slept in his bed, still fully clothed, unmolested, alive. He'd spent the night in the chair by his desk, supposedly reviewing maps and ledgers. In reality, he'd spent it watching her breathe, wondering when he'd become the kind of fool who let a beautiful stowaway survive simply because she'd looked at him, like he was human instead of monster. The pirate code was clear about stowaways. It was clear about showing weakness. And it was absolutely clear about what happened when Captain started making decisions based on attraction instead of strategy. "Captain?" His quartermaster's voice came from outside the door, cautious. The crew's asking about the girl. Of course they were. By now, every man aboard knew that Elena had survived the night. They'd be drawing their own conclusions, most of them probably correct. Blackwood had built his command on being utterly predictable in his ruthlessness. Mercy wasn't part of the equation that had kept him alive and powerful for 15 years. "Tell them to mind their own business," Blackwood called back, "unless they'd like to volunteer for keel-hauling duty." "Aye, Captain." But the damage was done. Questions would spread from the Black Serpent to every port they visited. Captain Blackwood's reputation, built so carefully on fear and absolute certainty, had developed its first crack. Alina stirred, consciousness returning slowly. When her eyes opened and focused on him, Blackwood saw the moment she remembered where she was, fear flashing briefly, before being replaced by something that looked dangerously like trust. "You kept your word," she said, sitting up and smoothing her disheveled dress. "The sun's risen. You survived the night." He moved to pour her water from a pitcher, a domesticity that felt foreign in this cabin that had witnessed only violence and solitude. "Jamaica's 2 days' sail. I'll keep my end of the bargain, and if I asked to stay?" The question hung between them like cannon smoke. Blackwood set down the cup harder than necessary. "You don't know what you're asking, don't I?" Alina stood, moving toward him with the same courage that had made her stow away in the first place. "I've spent the night in the quarters of the Caribbean's most feared pirate captain. I've seen your maps, your weapons, your gold. I've listened to your crew on deck and heard how they speak your name with respect earned, not just fear forced. And I've seen you, Nathaniel Blackwood, not just the legend." His name from her lips did something to his carefully constructed defense. "That legend is all that keeps this crew loyal and my enemies at bay. The moment I show weakness, is this weakness?" She gestured between them. "Or is it the first honest thing you've allowed yourself in 20 years? Before he could answer, shouts erupted from the deck above. His first mate's voice carried urgency that made Blackwood's battle instincts flare immediately. "Captain! Black sails on the horizon!" "It's Captain Rourke." The name turned Blackwood's blood to ice. Marcus Rourke, once his closest friend, now his bitterest enemy. The man who'd betrayed their partnership 5 years ago and had been hunting him ever since. Determined to claim the Black Serpent and everything Blackwood had built. "Stay here," Blackwood commanded Alina, already reaching for his weapons. "Don't come on deck no matter what you hear." "Who is he?" Blackwood strapped on his cutlass, checked his pistols, transformed before her eyes from the uncertain man of last night into the legendary captain his reputation promised. "Someone who knows exactly how to hurt me. And now that you're aboard my ship, he's got the perfect weapon." Understanding and horror dawned in Elena's eyes simultaneously. "I've put you in danger. You put yourself in danger the moment you came aboard." But his voice had softened despite the crisis unfolding above. "Rourke doesn't follow the pirate code. He doesn't take prisoners for ransom. If he takes this ship, everyone aboard feeds the shark sand, that's if they're lucky." The Black Serpent shuddered as warning shots thundered across the water. Rourke was making his intentions clear without wasting time on negotiations. Elena grabbed Blackwood's arm as he moved toward the door. "What do I do?" He looked at her, this girl who'd stumbled into his world seeking escape and, instead, found herself trapped in the middle of a war between two of the Caribbean's deadliest pirates. The smart choice would be to use her as a bargaining chip, trade her to Rourke for safe passage. The practical choice would be to put her in a rowboat before the battle started, let her take her chances with the sea rather than certain death. Instead, Captain Nathaniel Blackwood made the choice that confirmed every fear his crew had whispered about since she'd come aboard. He pulled Alina close, pressing a hard kiss to her forehead that tasted of rum and desperation, and something that felt dangerously like hope. "You survive," he commanded. "No matter what happens on that deck, you survive. Hide in here. Barricade the door if you have to. When this is over, we both survive," Elena interrupted fiercely. "That's your new bargain, Captain. Both of us. Together." Another volley of cannon fire shook the ship. His crew was shouting, preparing for the battle that would determine whether the Black Serpent remained under Blackwood's command or became another trophy for Rourke's collection of conquered vessels. Blackwood cupped Elena's face in his scarred hand, memorizing features he'd only known for hours, but that had somehow become essential. "I've made a lot of promises in my life, broken most of them, but this one you'll keep," she finished, "because you're not the monster everyone thinks you are. After today, you might disagree." He released her and moved to the door, every inch the legendary captain again. Bar this door behind me. Trust no one except me. And Elena? Yes? Thank you for surviving the night. It was the most honest conversation I've had in 20 years. Then he was gone, his boots thundering up the stairs to the deck where his crew waited, and Captain Marcus Rourke's ship bore down on them with black sails and deadly intentions. The battle that would define everything. His reputation, his command, his life, and the future of the girl who'd accidentally become the one thing he couldn't afford to lose, was about to begin. Below deck, Elena barred the door with shaking hands and pressed her ear against the wood, listening to the sounds of war erupting on the Black Serpent. She'd survived one night in the captain's quarters by facing her fear. Now, she'd have to survive another kind of test entirely, one measured in cannon fire and crossed cutlasses, and the desperate hope that the man she was starting to care for could be as dangerous as his legend promised. The deck of the Black Serpent transformed into controlled chaos as Captain Rourke's ship, the Crimson Vengeance, closed the distance between them. Blackwood's crew moved with the precision of men who'd survived countless battles under his command, loading cannons and preparing for the violence that would determine whether they lived to see another sunset. "Captain Blackwood!" Rourke's voice carried across the water, amplified by a speaking trumpet and dripping with malicious satisfaction. "I see you've acquired something precious since we last met. Perhaps we should discuss terms before this gets messy." Blackwood's jaw clenched. Somehow, Rourke already knew about Elena, which meant someone aboard his ship had betrayed him some word to his enemy about the stowaway who'd survived the night in his quarters. The pirate code demanded swift justice for traitors, but first he had to survive this encounter. "There are no terms, Rourke," Blackwood shouted back, hand resting on his cutlass. "Turn your ship around, or learn why the Black Serpent has never been conquered." Rourke's laughter echoed across the waves. Bold words for a man who's grown soft. The legendary Captain Blackwood, brought low by a pretty face. How the mighty have fallen. His quartermaster appeared at Blackwood's elbow, voice low and urgent. "Captain, half the crew is wondering if the girl's worth dying for. They're loyal, but Rourke's got 40 guns to our 30. Those aren't favorable odds. Then we don't fight fair." Blackwood's eyes scanned the horizon, battle instincts calculating angles and currents with the expertise of 20 years commanding these waters. "Signal the crew, we're running east into the shallows. Rourke's ship draws more water than ours. He follows, he runs aground, and if he doesn't follow, he will." Blackwood's voice carried absolute certainty. "Because he doesn't want the ship, he wants to humiliate me, wants to prove that showing mercy makes you, and he wants that girl to make his point." The Black Serpent lurched as the crew adjusted sails, catching wind that would carry them toward the treacherous shallows near a small island chain. It was a desperate maneuver, one mistake, and they'd beach themselves, but Blackwood had navigated these waters for 15 years. Rourke was a formidable enemy, but he lacked the intimate knowledge that came from making the Caribbean your home and graveyard. Below deck, Elena heard the change in the ship's movement and disobeyed orders with the same courage that had brought her aboard in the first place. She emerged onto the deck just as the Crimson Vengeance fired warning shots that sent water geysers erupting alongside the hull. "Elena, get back inside!" Blackwood roared, but it was too late. Rourke had seen her. "There she is!" Rourke's triumph rang out. "The weakness in your armor, old friend. Hand her over, and I'll let your crew live. Keep her, and I'll send every man aboard to Davy Jones, starting with her." Elena moved to Blackwood's side, and he saw his crew watching this moment with intense scrutiny. Their captain, who'd never shown mercy, never hesitated, never let anything compromise his command, faced an impossible choice. And she'd just made it exponentially harder by refusing to hide. "I won't let you trade me for their lives," Elena said quietly. "Only for him. If you do, you'll never forgive yourself. And neither will they." She nodded toward his crew. "You taught them that loyalty matters more than survival. That the pirate code means something. Don't betray that now." Blackwood looked at this woman who'd been aboard his ship less than 2 days, and somehow understood him better than men who'd sailed with him for years. She was right. If he handed her over to save himself, he'd lose something more valuable than his life, the respect that kept his crew loyal and his enemies cautious. All hands, Blackwood's command rang across the deck. Battle stations, we're taking the shallows. Any man who can't stomach the fight, I'll put you in a rowboat now with no hard feelings. Not one man moved to leave. Instead, his first mate drew his cutlass and raised it high. For the Black Serpent, for the captain. The crew's answering roar drowned out even Rourke's artillery as the Black Serpent surged toward the shallows with death breathing down its stern and a woman worth fighting for standing beside a captain who'd finally found something more important than his legend. The Crimson Vengeance followed, exactly as Blackwood had predicted. Rourke's pride wouldn't let him do otherwise. "Elena," Blackwood said as the first island appeared on the horizon, "whatever happens in the next hour, know this: you surviving my quarters changed something I thought was dead. And I'd rather die keeping you alive than live knowing I traded you away." She took his hand, heedless of the crew watching, and squeezed once. "Then let's make sure neither of us dies today, Captain." The battle for the Black Serpentine, for the soul of its captain, was about to reach its breaking point in the treacherous shallows where legends were either forged or destroyed. And everyone aboard knew that when the cannon smoke cleared, nothing would ever be the same again. Blackwood raised his hand, waiting for the perfect moment. The shallows loomed closer. Rourke's ship closed the gap. His crew held their breath. Now. Blackwood's command split the air. "Hard to starboard, all sails." The Black Serpent turned with the grace of a dancer, skimming over shallows that Blackwood knew by heart. Behind them, the Crimson Vengeance tried to follow, and ran aground with a grinding shriek of wood on, coral that echoed across the water like a death knell. Rourke's screams of rage faded as the Black Serpent escaped into open waters, damaged but intact, with a crew that cheered their captain and a woman who'd just watched him choose honor over survival. The legend of Captain Blackwood had just added a new chapter 1 written in defiance, courage, and the beginning of something that looked dangerously like redemption. 3 days after escaping Rourke's attack, the Black Serpent limped into a hidden cove on the southern coast of Jamaica, one of Blackwood's secret refuges known only to his most trusted crew. The battle had cost them 2 sails, damaged rigging, and identified a traitor who now rested in the ocean's embrace after facing the crew's justice. But it had also cost something less tangible and far more dangerous. Blackwood's carefully maintained distance from his own humanity. Elena stood at the ship's bow, watching the Caribbean sunset paint the water in shades that reminded her why she'd risked everything to escape Port Royal. Behind her, she heard his approach, had learned to recognize the sound of his boots, the particular way he moved through space like he owned it. "You should be angry with me," Blackwood said, coming to stand beside her. Without his weapons and captain's coat, wearing just a loose white shirt and weathered trousers, he looked less like a legendary pirate and more like the man he might have been if the world had been kinder. "You came aboard seeking escape, and I've dragged you into a war that could have killed you. You also kept me alive when killing me would have been simpler." Elena turned to face him, studying the face she'd memorized over 3 intense days. "And you chose to fight rather than trade me away. That's not dragging me into war, Nathaniel. It's standing beside me in it." The use of his first name, something she'd started doing after the battle. Something he'd stopped correcting, sent warmth through his chest that had nothing to do with the tropical heat. "The crew's talking. They're saying their captain's been bewitched, that I'm making decisions based on attraction instead of strategy. Are they wrong?" Blackwood ran a hand through his hair, frustration and honesty warring in his expression. "I don't know anymore. 20 years I've commanded these waters by being absolutely certain. Never questioning, never hesitating. And then you climbed into my cargo hold and made me question everything." Elena moved closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. Maybe certainty isn't as valuable as you think. Maybe the ability to change, to grow, to let someone in, maybe that's what separates captains from tyrants. In my world, tyrants live longer. But do they live better? The question hung between them as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars emerged. Around them, his crew worked to repair the ship, pointedly giving their captain and his unexpected passenger privacy. Everyone aboard had seen the shift between them, the way she softened his edges and he strengthened her courage. It was becoming impossible to ignore what was building in the space where legend met humanity. "My quartermaster thinks I should put you ashore here," Blackwood admitted. "Says that keeping you aboard will only bring more trouble. That Rourke won't stop hunting us as long as he knows you're my weakness." "Is that what I am?" Elena challenged. "Your weakness?" Blackwood cupped her face in his hand, those scarred, deadly hands that had commanded so much violence, but touched her with shocking gentleness. "You're the first person in 20 years to look at me and see something worth saving. So yes, Elena. You're my weakness, and my strength, and the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me." She rose on her toes, closing the distance between them until their breath mingled in the warm Caribbean air. "I'm not going ashore. Not in Jamaica. Not anywhere. Unless you're coming with me. I'm a pirate, love. The Royal Navy wants me hanged. There's a price on my head in every civilized port. I can't just walk away from this life. Then I'll stay in it." Her hands fisted in his shirt. "I didn't survive the night in your quarters just to run away when things get complicated. I survived because I saw something in you worth surviving for." The kiss happened inevitably, a collision of two people who'd been fighting gravity since the moment they'd met. Blackwood poured 20 years of isolation into that kiss, and Elena answered with a courage that had always been there, just waiting for something worth being brave for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "You deserve better than a pirate's life. Better than running from the Navy and sleeping with weapons under your "What I deserve," Elena said firmly, "is the choice to decide my own fate. And I choose this. I choose you. I choose the adventure and the danger and the absolute insanity of falling for the Caribbean's most notorious pirate captain." "You're falling for me?" The vulnerability in his voice would have shocked his crew. Past tense, actually. She smiled against his lips. "I fell about the time you offered me a bargain instead of a watery grave. Everything since has just been confirmation." Blackwood laughed, a real laugh, free of the darkness that usually colored his humor. "You're absolutely mad, probably." Elena kissed him again, softer this time. "Is that going to be a problem, Captain?" "The biggest problem," his quartermaster's voice interrupted from a discreet distance, "is that we've got company. 3 ships approaching from the north. Royal Navy by the looks of their sails." The moment shattered. Blackwood's expression shifted instantly from vulnerable man to legendary captain. "How long do we have?" "An hour. Maybe less if they've spotted us." Blackwood turned back to Elena, and she saw the war in his eyes between keeping her safe and keeping her with him. "The Navy's been hunting me for 15 years. If they take this ship, they'll hang me and imprison anyone associated with me. Elena, this is your last chance to walk away." She grabbed his hand, holding tight. "I told you already, Nathaniel. We both survive. Together. So stop trying to protect me by pushing me away and start figuring out how we escape this." For a long moment, he stared at her. Then he turned to his quartermaster with the decisive command that had made him legendary. "Wake the crew. We're running dark tonight, no lights, minimal sails. There's a passage through the reef on the western side of this cove. It's narrow and treacherous, but the Navy ships draw too much water to follow. Captain, we've never run that passage at night. One mistake, and we're driftwood." Blackwood's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then I'd better not make any mistakes." He looked at Elena. Still sure about that choice? She squeezed his hand. More than ever. As the crew scrambled to prepare for the most dangerous navigation of their lives, Blackwood pulled Elena close one more time. "After tonight, If we survive, I need to tell you something about my past. About why Rourke hates me. About the real reason the Navy's so determined to catch me. Whatever it is, Elena said, it doesn't change how I feel. You say that now. His voice carried the weight of secrets that could destroy what they were building. But some sins don't wash away, even with all the ocean in the world. The approaching Navy ships loomed larger on the horizon as night fell over the Black Serpent. And in his quarters later, as Blackwood studied charts by candlelight and Elena slept in his bed, exactly where she'd been that first fateful night, he made a silent promise to whatever gods protected fools and pirates. If they survived this, he'd tell her everything. And if she still chose him after knowing the truth, he'd spend the rest of his life proving he deserved that choice. The passage through the reef at midnight was everything Blackwood had feared and more. The Black Serpent moved through darkness with only starlight to guide them, every man aboard holding their breath as coral walls rose on either side like the teeth of some massive sea beast. One error in navigation, one unexpected current, and they'd rip the hull open, turning their legendary ship into a tomb. Blackwood stood at the helm, hands steady on the wheel despite his heart hammering against his 20 years of experience guided him through waters he'd only traversed twice before, and never at night. Beside him, Elena held a lantern shutter to show only the faintest, glow enough for him to see the compass. Not enough to give away their position to the Navy ships searching the open waters behind them. Rocks to starboard, his lookout whispered urgently from above. 5 feet, 4, 3. The ship groaned as wood scraped against coral, but held. Blackwood adjusted their course with the delicate touch of a man who'd learned to read the sea's moods through the wheel itself. You're insane, Elena breathed, watching him navigate impossible waters with nothing but instinct and nerve. You're the one who chose to stay aboard. His slight smile showed despite the tension. Too late to change your mind now, love. An hour passed like. Then too. The passage widened marginally, giving them breathing room before narrowing again to a gap that seemed impossibly small for a ship their size. Behind them, the Navy's searchlights swept the waters they'd abandoned, finding nothing but empty waves. Almost through, Blackwood murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Just another quarter-mile. That's when the second lookout shouted down, "Captain, ship ahead!" blocking the exit. Blackwood's blood turned to ice. Someone had known about this passage. Someone had predicted his escape route and positioned a ship to trap them. And there was only one person who knew him well enough to anticipate this move. "It's Rourke, isn't it?" Elena asked, reading the truth in his expression. He must have freed his ship from the shallows and come around. Blackwood's mind raced through impossible calculations. They couldn't turn back. The Navy blocked that route. They couldn't fight in these narrow waters. And they couldn't ram through Rourke's blockade without destroying both ships. They were trapped. "Captain?" His quartermaster's voice carried barely controlled panic. "Your orders?" For the first time in 20 years of commanding these waters, Captain Nathaniel Blackwood had no answer. Every option led to death or capture. The legendary pirate who'd built his reputation on always having a plan faced the reality that some battles couldn't be won through strategy or strength. Elena set down the lantern and took his hand. "Tell me the truth, how bad is this?" The admission cost him. "Rourke's got us boxed. The Navy's behind us. These coral walls mean we can't maneuver. And in about an hour, the tide's going to shift if we're still in this passage when that happens. The current will drive us into the rocks, so we need a miracle. Or we need to give Rourke what he wants." Blackwood's voice dropped. "Me. If I surrender, he'll let the crew go. Let you go. He wants his revenge against me, not... No." Elena's voice cut through his sacrifice like a blade. "We established this already. Both of us survive. Together. So stop trying to be a martyr and start thinking like the smartest pirate captain in the Caribbean." Something about her absolute faith in him, this girl who'd known him less than a week, but somehow understood his. Corin locked the part of his mind that had been frozen by fear. Blackwood looked at the impossible situation with fresh eyes. The passage, the tide, the coral walls, Rourke blocking the exit, the Navy behind them. "I have an idea," he said slowly. "It's dangerous, possibly suicidal, definitely insane." "So, completely in character?" Elena squeezed his hand. "Tell me." "The tide's about to turn. When it does, the water's going to rush out of this passage with massive force. Anything caught in it gets driven into the open sea. If we time it perfectly, wait until the last possible second, we could use that current like a slingshot. We'd hit Rourke's ship at full speed, break through his blockade before he can react." His quartermaster had been listening. "Captain, that current you're talking about? It'll also drive us into the coral walls if we're off by even a few feet. We'd be gambling the entire ship, the entire crew, on my ability to navigate," Blackwood finished. "Yes, I know." Silence fell across the deck as his crew absorbed the insane plan. Then his first mate spoke up. "We've followed you through 15 years of impossible situations, Captain. Never lost faith yet, not starting now." One by one, the crew echoed their agreement. These men who'd built their lives on his leadership weren't abandoning him or the woman, who'd somehow become part of their strange brotherhood when it mattered most. Blackwood's throat tightened. "Get ready then. Secure everything. When I give the word, we're going to move faster than this ship has ever moved. Elena, you need to get below deck and I'm staying right here." Her tone allowed no argument. "You need someone to watch the starboard side since you'll be focused on navigation. I've lived in Caribbean ports my entire life. I know how to read water." He wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in his cabin where she'd be safer. But there wasn't time, and truthfully, he needed her eyes. More than that, he needed her presence. The reminder that he was fighting for something beyond reputation and survival. "All right," he conceded. "But if something goes wrong, then we go wrong together." She positioned herself at the rail, watching the dark water with intense concentration. "That's the deal, Captain. Accept it." In the minutes crawled past as they waited for the tide. Rourke's ship remained at the passage exit, lanterns blazing with confident victory. The Navy's searchlights continued sweeping the waters behind them. And the Black Serpent held position in the narrow passage, every man aboard knowing they were about to attempt something that would either write their legend or end their lives. Blackwood felt the shift in the water before he saw it. That subtle change in current that meant the tide was turning. "Get ready," he called softly. "Quartermaster, I need every sail ready to drop on my command. First mate, have the crew prepared to shift weight port side if I call for it." "Captain," Elena said urgently, "Rourke's moving. He's figured out what we're planning." Damn, Rourke knew him too well. But the other captain had made one critical mistake. He'd positioned his ship directly in line with the current's flow, thinking it made him an immovable barrier. Instead, he'd made himself a perfect target. "Now or never," Blackwood muttered. The current strengthened, pulling at the Black Serpent like an eager hand. "All sails! Drop everything! Hold on!" The ship lurched forward as sails caught wind and current simultaneously. The Black Serpent shot through the passage like a cannonball, accelerating to speeds that made the coral walls blur past in the darkness. Blackwood's hands moved on the wheel with the precision of a master, adjusting for every shift in current, every subtle change in the wind. "Rocks! Port side!" Elena shouted. "Turn right! More! More!" He trusted her eyes, cranked the wheel, felt the ship respond despite the insane speed. Wood scraped coral again, but they remained intact. The passage walls widened. Rourke's ship loomed ahead, suddenly too close, too fast. "Brace for impact!" Blackwood roared. The Black Serpent hit the Crimson Vengeance at an angle, the force of the tidal current behind them making their smaller ship into a battering ram. Rourke's vessel shuddered, tilted, its carefully positioned blockade broken as it was driven sideways by the impact. Hard to port. Blackwood spun the wheel desperately as they shot past Rourke's damaged ship. Behind them, he heard his enemies' screams of rage, but they were already through, already in open water, already home free with the Navy too far behind to catch them. The crew erupted in cheers that echoed across the Caribbean night. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, with insane strategy and trust in their captain's skill. They'd escaped both the Royal Navy and Captain Rourke's trap. Blackwood's hands shook on the wheel as adrenaline drained away. Alina appeared at his side, wrapping her arms around him in a embrace that grounded him back to reality. "We survived," she whispered against his chest. "Both of us. Together." He held her tight. This woman who'd turned his world upside down and somehow made it better. Around them, his crew celebrated their escape. But Blackwood only had awareness for Alina, the warmth of her, the trust she'd shown, the future she represented. "I love you," he said, the words foreign but right. "I don't know when it happened or how, but Elena, I love you with everything I have left that's worth anything." She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face that caught the starlight. "I love you too, my pirate captain, my legend made real." The kiss they shared was witnessed by his entire crew, and this time, instead of skepticism, their faces showed approval. She'd earned her place aboard. The Black Serpent turned it through courage and loyalty and refusing to let their captain sacrifice himself for her safety. "So what now?" Alina asked when they finally broke apart. "Where does the most notorious pirate in the Caribbean go when he's finally found something more valuable than gold?" Blackwood looked out at the open ocean, at the ship that had been his home for 15 years, at the crew who'd followed him through hell and back. Then he looked at the woman in his arms who'd changed everything. "We sail," he said simply. "We keep sailing until we find a place where legends and love can coexist. And if that place doesn't exist," he smiled, that dangerous pirate smile that promised adventure and trouble in equal measure, "then we'll make our own." The Black Serpent turned toward the open Caribbean, sails full and bearing a captain who'd finally learned that the greatest treasure wasn't found in sunken Spanish galleons or raided merchant vessels. It was found in the courage to let someone see past your legend to the person beneath it in having that person choose you anyway. Captain Nathaniel Blackwood had spent 20 years building a reputation as the most feared pirate sailing these waters. But on this night, under Caribbean stars, with Elena in his arms and his loyal crew at his back, he discovered something even better than fear. He discovered what it meant to be chosen, to be trusted, and to finally, after so long, come home.